IVM.
I have to be honest, this is a slightly different episode from what you've done so far. A, because it's with someone I have fanboyed about for a long time. And B, because it's not a generic conversation where we have lots of randomness. But for once, I had to be straightforward and actually get to the point in terms of really getting a bunch of things out of someone I really admire. Because I didn't grow up wanting to be an entrepreneur. I honestly wanted to be a VJ on MTV. I'm a 90s kid, don't blame me, that shit was cool then. But when I did take the plunge in 2009, I honestly didn't know too many people to look up to in the space, especially in the media space. I didn't really know too many people who had actually started and run an organization. But as time grew and I began to see the whole media, entertainment and advertising space of what it was, there was always one gold standard. Now, and there's also a question many people have asked me, which is that, who's an Indian entrepreneur you always looked up to? And my answer almost every time would be Ronnie Screwvala. He's by leaps and bounds, and I repeat this word, the gold standard of a pure media entrepreneur, as in its most new age form, and not in its traditional family-driven business. And as I look at his journey from his early days in the space to now, I see a few threads that I've come to look at as the pillars of not just being a great media entrepreneur, but to also be an awesome media professional in today's time. Now, I could go on and on about him for this entire episode, but then you'd miss out on all the things he has to share and say. So notebooks and pens out, because this is a very special episode of Advertising is Dead. With me, Varun Duggirala, co-founder and content-chief at The Glitch, talking to the one and only Ronnie Screwvala. We'll be right back after this.
Every week comes a show where three people come together to tell you about stuff they like. A movie, a TV show, a book, and other stuff. Tune in every Monday on the IVM podcast app to IVM Likes. Batman approves this message. Thank you, Batman.
Welcome back to Advertising is Dead. We're on a very special episode with, and I'm going to try not to fanboy, with Ronnie Screwvala. I don't know how I'm going to call you by your first name, first of all. It's going to take me some time to do that. Because I've been talking to the guys at IBM for a while and saying, when do I get to do this? Because
you have to call me by my first name, because Screwvala in any case is a very tricky name to keep going at it on the set.
Fair enough. Then I will call you Ronnie. And I was telling you this before we started recording, saying that when we started Glitch 10 years ago, you were responsible for giving us our first gig, and we were people who didn't have any background in what you were doing. You were two guys who left a music channel and decided to start a production house. And I remember walking into the UTV office at that point of time and kind of seeing the vibe of things were, and we got this project, and I remember how we kind of felt that day. When you're starting off, and a lot of people ask this question, you have this, people say that it's tough to start off. Mm-hmm. I've always felt that it's actually, after you get your first gig, the second one is really the toughest thing to do. Would you agree? Would you say that's how the journey of an entrepreneur is?
Yes. I think the biggest challenge, obviously, for most people is the final decision-making process, because there are two things. I mean, or three things. I think the fear of failure that holds you back. The sitting on the fence just sounds like such a comfortable place to sit on that getting off it either which way is a problem. And I think the third one is about timing, because most people feel, okay, let me try it. Now, the word "try" itself is a first ding dong of failure, because I think you can't time it. So I think between those three, if you get past that, then you feel, wow, I've gotten into that. But I think scaling an organization, whether it's your first fundraise, your second fundraise is much more. The first 5 people may be tough to hire, but the next 50 people are even more difficult to hire. So yes, that's how it would go.
And many times when you read about the entrepreneurial journey, and with multiple things in terms of books and everything else, what really gets spoken about a lot more is about the good stuff that happens. But I know that you propagate this, you need to have enough failures along the way to really be able to do this. And then those failures could be as small as saying the fact that you not being able to maintain the office the way you wanted to, or not able to hire someone, or even cash flow, right? And when you look at failures as something that's given, because we keep having these conversations with a lot of people, how do you see that being important?
Well, I mean, success is always comfortable to hear about. So if you keep reading about people's success, how is that how are you learning? Because it's a nice comfort zone. You can have that sometimes if you want to read something encouraging. But primarily, the hunger for you is to really figure out the cathartic stories, the stories where people have come up from something. And you're not going to get that. And I think the real world is about that, right? The fact of the matter is, if we don't understand how important it is to fail, and I don't think we should be made in this one punishing regime, nor it should be made that everyone just has to fail to succeed. I think we over dramatize it on the other side also. But I think in India, the main problem is that we don't evangelize it and we don't celebrate it enough. And I don't mean that just because you fail, the minute you fail, you open a bottle of champagne. It's more about understanding that, wow, this is anyway the progress to doing that. And if you keep calling your failure a failure and not a setback. And for me, the best criteria has been is if I can, laugh about it 6 months later on some of that. It's always a good way. And that's sometimes gets you through a thing like says, wow, this is a really bad moment. You think I'll ever be able to laugh about this 6 months from now? And if you feel good about that, that's already thawing in that process. And sometimes I think people ask you, like, what's your worst failure? And I'm saying there is no such thing, because right now, maybe my last failure would appear to be my worst. But, as far as I'm concerned, my worst failure is still to come.
And context is so important also, right? Like what you're saying, right? And I think many times it's about failures, many times could even be tough, people might construe a tough decision you had to take as an entrepreneur as being a failure. But in many cases, that tough decisions actually led to where the company's really gone, and that also many times becomes a problem, right? And
I think one big thing is indecision. And most people think indecision is a safe place to be. I think it's the worst place to be.
That's so true, because if you keep playing safe, so I was talking to my partner yesterday, and both of us were discussing. I said, do you have any questions? If you had to ask only one question, what would you ask? And he said that there was something you said a while back about saying, if you had to choose between scale and control, you would choose scale any day. And he reminded me that this was actually a point which we discussed before we got acquired a year ago, when we were discussing, should we do this or not? And he had reminded, and we in conversation, this kind of came up, and he said that, but as a caveat, if in choosing, making that decision, where do you draw the line of where scale ends and vision gets diluted?
It's a personal thing. I don't think you can write a textbook on that. It is a very personal thing. Firstly, scale, you need to get turned on by scale. True. Second, if you got to see whether all your co-founders and especially your team is going to get turned on by scale. And third is, just because you're going to scale doesn't mean that the next level is a comfortable level to be in.
Correct.
So are you fully prepared for that? I think it's not about that versus control. I think the question here, the word control in India has a different connotation. Because I think for most people, we still have this obsession of 51%. That seems to be the definition of control, which is so bizarre. But I think if you look at iconic role models today, the key challenge is you don't have those. I think, 10 years back, the large industrial groups everyone looked up to. But today, I mean, it's not like you look down to them, but there's no real reason why you would look up to them, because the general new first generation entrepreneurs are creating better role models for different reasons.
And when you go into that, I know that a lot of startup founders struggle with this battle, right? They're saying, okay, I've gotten this off the ground. I need to do this. I'm looking to get someone like a mentor or an investor, and you've been that for many companies. And it's also the value you bring in individually, apart from what we monitor in that sense. What have you seen that there are two things. One is what people tend generally try to look for. And secondly, what they should actually be looking for, which is don't really ask whoever the mentor or investor is. And what are those two sides? How do you see that?
In the terms of the balance? Or
in terms of the balance of what people should really be looking for from their mentor or investor versus what they tend to ask for a lot more.
To me, a mentor is someone who can really ask me the questions I can't ask myself. I'm not looking for answers. I'd much prefer a mentor ask me hard questions. Because for the answer, if I want an answer from him, I'll have to give him or her a lot more information about every single aspect of the situation. So most people think mentors are there to give you answers. I think that they're there to ask you the hard questions.
And also kind of put you on the journey which you need to go on, right? Not really tell you what to do, but really say, okay, well, this is what you might face, and
through questions, through questions that thought provoke you.
No.
Yeah,
I know that you got out of the content space for a while, and you looked at sports as an arena, and you looked at your foundation as an arena for a bit.
So I think my two focus areas really has been our online education company and our foundation Swadesh.
And very recently, although you got back into the content space and more connected to us, the fact that Uri won a Cannes this year for the marketing around it. And what I find interesting with that is the fact that in some ways, I feel the agency space has always stayed away from really getting into what I would say the content business is.
Yeah.
And now everyone's talking content all the time. And I find that my side of the world, which is the agency world, kind of feels a little detached from it. From what you've seen in that space and whoever would be people creating stuff in it and so on and so forth, how do you see the kind of say entrepreneurs coming into that space right now? From
which one?
The content space compared to how it was when you kind of came in. What is the differentiation?
So storytelling, digital, I think storytelling is very universal. I think I run an online education company along with my co-founders, and by the core of everything, when people ask me what's so common between media and education, I'm saying storytelling. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, if you don't engagingly engage your learners...
It's like I'm a good teacher in class.
Yeah,
right?
And I think that's pretty much what that is. So now the question is, you may be doing something in 30 seconds, then you need to do something in 30 minutes, and then sometimes you need to do it in 300 minutes. Hopefully not 300 minutes though. And I think, but at the end of the core, if you're a storyteller, that's going to be your common signal. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Two things that I think an advertising marketing person would bring to that is, one is a very strong understanding of your audience, because that's what you're trained to do. And if you can bring that knowledge to storytelling, that's great. And second at the core is storytelling. Yeah.
And just going along with that whole storytelling aspect, right, which you said, when you are running a company, when you are doing that, it's also about the vision and the story that you continue to show to people you have work in the organization. Starts off as a small set, then scales and scales beyond that. But as you're moving with that, how do you continually make yourself really look at that story and seeing how and keep adding to it, not from fictionalizing it in that sense, but really being able to make sure that your vision is as connected to what it needs to be?
I think that clarity and conviction is to come from you, and then you need to articulate it very well. So I think it's a very, very important point that, you could be really bright and really clear, but if you're not being able to articulate your vision, you're not going to be able to really create that kind of value. But it's a fine line between that and a lot of people who think that's the only thing to do. So I know that a lot of people have been able to raise a lot of money just on great articulation, which itself has its own problems, because then when you get down to actually creating a business, you're lost.
Yeah, that's true. And is there too much of a focus on present-day entrepreneurs on the funding cycle?
Yes, too much.
Too much, rather than actually what the idea is. And
it's just too much. It's disproportionate, because the flag of the badge of honor has almost become the funding you raise, not the business you create.
And really running a profitable organization that actually gives...
I think profitability is important, and there could be gestation periods that could be long. True. So I'm someone that you need to run a real business. If that real business means you're going to be in investment mode for 6 to 7 years, that's fine. So profit and loss is not such a bad word. But if it's in a context where your gross margin positive is never, and you're constantly buying customers based on discounts, I just don't see that as a long-term model. Unless you have a strategy for it.
True. And as this whole space proliferates, right, and we're looking at the different players in it, and I see on one end there's the television networks who continue to do what they do. There are also the OTT players around there. There's this huge influx of people creating content, but also trying to own their platforms in that sense. When I look outside in from a brand perspective, what I think the biggest confusion they're facing is how do they find the right mix, right? And what our continued conversation with them is to say, how can you kind of intertwine that to what your whole story is? Have you seen the fact that, do you see content more engaging, and do you realize that you look at the brand a little differently today than you would look before, because they have more avenues to tell a story?
Not really. I think the different platforms, the context of binge watching, the concepts of accessibility, the context of non-appointment viewing has changed the way in which stories need to be told. You needed a cliffhanger for a daily soap opera on television. You may not need that if you're watching binge watching, various different connotations. Also, the platforms allow you to be able to cater to a very focused audience versus the largest common denominator, which television was.
I was listening to a chat you had with Vishal Gondal about, about a year or ago, and you mentioned one thing which I finally felt I found one more person who says this, is the fact that you said that whenever your office always need to have a pristine loo. Which I find, I think finally someone else has said this, because that is exactly what I do every morning when I walk into office. And the fact that how pristine your loo is actually shows the fact how much value you actually give to how the entire organization is.
Yes, it's a sign of how important the small details of life are important to you in every aspect. Yeah. But it also keeps you very grounded in many aspects. But I think I form opinions based on that.
I know exactly if you ever visit our office what I would make sure is done. Yeah. Being a leader in a creative profession, especially if you have a business side angle to things, is tricky primarily because you're not dealing with, I would say, a tangible asset, in the sense something you can really hold in your hands. And many times the calls you take aren't really, there's no science to what you're really pushing out there. Managing creative professionals and working with creative teams and kind of making sure that business end is taken care of, yet on the other end you have the creative aspect in mind. How do you do that balance? Well,
I think you have to cut out the overindulgence. I think the minute you make this into one of those very special situations, you're giving it and putting it on a platform which it doesn't deserve to be. There's creativity in being a lawyer, there's creativity in being a surgeon, and there's creativity in doing storytelling. If you take that as your basic mantra, you'll find that actually then you're not going to be able to be that indulgent. Yeah. I mean, if a surgeon has to start a surgery at 9, he's not going to say, today I'm not in the mood. Yeah. Okay. And so neither should a scriptwriter or a director have that sense of feeling when they're doing storytelling. There's a certain rigor and discipline. And I think the new eras of the digital platforms has brought about that discipline because it's very deadline oriented. Yeah. So there's no context of that. Yeah. So I think, yes, there's a certain rigor that comes in there. Creativity is overrated. If you're saying, you're creating something out of nothing, but in most industries you are. I think the problem with the indulgence on some of the sectors, especially in the media and entertainment industry, is we're just too indulgent. Yeah. We think we're special. Yeah. We think when we have to create creativity, it's so special that nobody else does that. It's creativity in space research. It's creative in everything else with a rigor and a discipline that we lack.
When you look at the entire business, do you feel that even though there is so much content out there right now, and this is conversation about content max in that sense, everyone's creating too much stuff. But as I talk to brands always, they say, is there stuff happening that is as focused on things? Is there enough good content happening, or is there enough, I would say, the right mix of content happening for audiences? And I turn back to something, it's actually about a business call someone's taking to really put this in that sense. But the more I talk to creators as well, I feel a lot of them are very individual projects which don't end up being as commercially viable. If you're talking to someone who's, let's say, a fresh creative professional wants to create content out there, especially in today's market, what would you turn to them and say that what should they keep in mind?
I have to say I'm quite disengaged with that context. Like you're launching a product or a service, you have to know who your target focus group is, who your learner is, who your audience is, who your consumer is. I think if you understand that and you're very clear who you're saying that for, and it's not indulgent. When you're making a creative work, you feel you can be indulgent because I want to tell my story my way. But if nobody's going to pick it up, it doesn't make a damn difference. So it's completely irrelevant. And when you're making a product, you'll never think, I want to make a product that I think I want to do it my way. And you have designers, and a Louis Vuitton or a Givenchy or whatever else will say, this is my vision. These are the clothes that I would wear. This is the clothes. But after some time, they're very focused on what they want to do. And if you haven't made that move, you're wasting your time.
There is this indulgence, I like to call it, the fact that I continue to have conversations with a lot of people who respond to our podcast, in the sense that I feel like there's so many people who are, let's say, students out there who want to break into this mythical world they like to call the media landscape. Like how I think every industry is a mythical thing till you actually get in and you have perceptions about it. The most consistent conversation I hear is what kind of a professional is required in today's time, which I think is a little more branched out from just being the media space, but across the board. Because what are am I qualified enough? Do I know enough about it? Maybe it's not for me because
if you're strong at understanding your consumer, that's your first step. If you are communicative and strong at being communicative in a sense of storytelling, fiction or non-fiction, a lecturer, a teacher, a learner, whichever way. I think that's definitely the second one. So I think understanding your consumer or audience is the first. Your knack and your communication skills and your clarity of thought, I think, is the second. And the third one to complete the picture is the rigor and the discipline.
Yeah. Did you find it tough, or not tough is the word, but did you feel that at some point is an advantage, but also disadvantage that you were an outsider coming into the industry when you started off?
I think more or less I would say it was an advantage, and I took it as an advantage. But I just want to tell you that that's because I took it that way. I looked at it as an opportunity, and I looked at it as an opportunity. If I had looked at it the other way, I would have failed, because I would have thought that I had a sense of entitlement, which I don't, and I couldn't have. And therefore, it gave me the right to relationships, because a lot of businesses are run on relationships, just not in the creative sector, in many ways. And I'm not sure they are the long-term ones over a period of time.
Yeah. I remember reading through your book when it came out, right? And I remember reading through all the chapters. And what I found interesting was that the methodology that you looked at of starting running and really operating a business didn't really change from the time, depending on what the business was. The predominant principles of what you looked at were the same. Be it,
toothbrushes or cable TV.
Exactly, right. In that sense. What do you think are the basics, right? If someone says today I want to be an entrepreneur, and like we said, they look at funding first and then idea later and so on and so forth. But what are the basics you keep in mind to say that these are my benchmarks of things I always have to tick the boxes off?
Yeah, I think there are multiple ones, but I think risk-taking is something that has to be in your DNA. The logical thing one is that this whole sense of entitlement where you feel I've got a great idea and then you pause and you think everyone's out there listening for that, I think is flawed. Because today, more than anything else, speed of execution is going to be the most important. So I think validation of an idea is important, but your risk-taking DNA ability. But I think the most important one is how solution-oriented are you?
When you look back at the time when you chose to make the pivots that you did, or try to make the decision that you did, would there be any which you turn around today and say that, okay, would I have done it differently? Would I have been better?
See, I think I just don't believe in hindsight in that context, because you don't have the luxury. So it's such a abstract and theoretical question that it's not worth anyone thinking about it. Because if I were to go back, I can't just look at the 2020 vision of what I did, because the other 20 factors that would have also changed if I had taken a different decision, I have no clue on them right now. So then I can't take that and use that as my learning for the future. Now I know if I did that differently, but there would have been 9 other things that would have also happened differently. So that's why I don't look at hindsight as a major learning experience.
Because and I asked you this question also because this is a question a lot of people tend to get into, right? It's saying, I could have done this better. Maybe I wouldn't have failed if I did this.
It's a nice social conversation over a drink. I don't drink, so then I don't have this conversation.
There was an interesting piece which I was reading, which was I think you were on a round table with a bunch, and you were talking about the whole business of how the whole content space, be it with Upgrad or with RSVP, has really evolved, and you were really talking about the fact that we sometimes look at it in silos, in the sense that in the movie business you're talking about blockbuster collections on one end, but not really factoring in how to look at, let's say, an OTT platform, digital, or looking at how television revenue comes in, and similarly Upgrad, like you said about storytelling content. How important is it to look at the distribution chain for content, especially from the business angle, beyond just what the content is?
No, it's very important, because otherwise you're living in la la land, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it has to get delivered to an audience, and that's your true test. And what's the consumption pattern of that? Like any other product. So you can have the best product, but if you haven't got your distribution and your retail outlets or whichever form you want to, it's going to be a problem. So I think we kind of look at that in silos, and that's a problem, because we think I've finished my work, now somebody else should do that. Excuse me, but you haven't understood who you made it for, or you created it for. How is somebody else going to be able to weave magic around it? And
has this piece of content worked is now such a bizarre question if you ask me to ask, because it might have done really well on a certain platform, but might not have done on the other. And sometimes you end up watching it much later on something else.
Correct.
And it actually gives it a longer lifetime if you look at it in that sense of the word. I I have a question I ask to every person who's a father to a daughter, because I am a father to a 2-year-old, and I always say, what would you advise of a father of a daughter, especially if someone who's an entrepreneur? Generally, what would your piece of advice?
Well, just what I did with my daughter. I think just, plan your life the way you want to do. I think, she wanted to get out there and get her education in a particular manner. When she finished that, she wanted to finish her master's in a particular manner. I think after that, the options that she's chosen, I think parents are always there to ask questions and guide. I don't think in today's life you can guarantee anyone on the other side, and therefore you need to be cautious about that. But I think core upbringing at the early stage, and then just being around and being supportive to whatever decision they want to make is very, very critical and important. It gives that sense of liberation and confidence to the sibling that I think may have a positive impact for the long term.
We do this thing at the end of every episode. We actually, it's our version of asking a couple of really random, non-technical questions. What can you whip up in an instant?
An idea.
What are you listening? Are you a music buff? Are you
a classical music buff, more for recreation, soothing, and meditation, I think.
What book would you recommend that you read in the last year or so?
Well, actually, quite a few. I mean, I think there have been some non-fiction books that I've read, and I think more on philosophy, more on life and death, more on things like intelligence and how we actually fool ourselves of being intelligent. So just a variety of things that interest me. And sometimes I read a book half and then move to another book and then come back to that book and whatever else. And I think I picked that up more from my wife, who's a much more voracious reader.
If I had to ask you why advertising will not die, what would your response be to that?
Because it's like communication. You need a communication medium. Somebody needs to communicate an idea into a thought process. And I think there's a link. Anything that has a link needs to be there for the long term.
Thank you so much for doing
this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you enjoy listening to content on the IVM Podcast Network, let me tell you about a couple of things that you should check out this week. On Simplified, Chuck, Naren, and Shrikhet talk about the history of the Cricket World Cup. On Paperback, Rachita and Satyajit are joined by founder of Indu Diva, Indu Nair, who talks about her transformation from being an employee to an employer and breaking the shackles of gender conditioning. On The Seen and the Unseen, Amit Verma is joined by economics professor Rajeshwari Sen Gupta for a fascinating discussion. On Ganatatra, Alok and Saryu are joined by journalist Parth MN, who specializes in covering the state of Bihar. They discuss why Bihar voted overwhelmingly for the BJP in 2019. On Advertising is Dead, Varun is joined by Gaurav Lulla, co-founder of Loose Cannon's content studio. They talk about the importance of brand communication and their mutual admiration for the brand Nike. Thanks, and we hope to see you again soon.
Hey guys, I'm Mikhail Almeida. I host a podcast with my co-hosts Akash Mehta and Siddharth Duggirala on the IVM app. It's called What a Player.
What a Player.
WADDAPLAYAH, because illiterates can't find it on their own.
No, and the her at the end is very important. What a player.
Yeah. And it comes out every Thursday on the IVM app. Tune in, we discuss everything sports, all sports.
All sports.
Yeah.
Mainly cricket, other sport in the middle, sandwich.
What happened to your language skills? Don't worry, he talks better on the show.
Yeah.
It's a great show. It has all things, including cricket and things around sports as well.
Yeah.
And some personal life.
As you can see, we're a very united podcast, and if you want to listen to us, tune in to us every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com.